So first, just a warm welcome to everyone. I hope you are all well, despite the current situation that seems to be going on for very, very long. But just welcome to this webinar. I think it's going to be extremely useful for our region, so I'm very, very excited that it's happening. Of course, the topic of our webinar is to support Caribbean cancer registries with the submission of data to the Cancer Incidence in 5 Continents publication. And this is going to be volume 12 of the publication. And just to go through what the objective of this webinar is, which is, as many of you know already, the call for data for volume 12 of the CI5 publication will be issued at some time in 2021. The timeline is not confirmed as yet, or maybe it is. Les is going to tell us all about it. And this webinar, which is going to be facilitated by our liaison, IARC, and I'll introduce him in a second, aims to share practical information with you about how this submission process works. Okay, and just to go through what our agenda is today, after we've completed the welcome and introductions, we're going to have a presentation by Les Mery. And I'll let him introduce himself in a second, but Les has been working with the Caribbean Hub since 2015 when he visited CARFA for a site assessment visit when they were trying to assess whether CARFA was the right implementing agency for the hub. And of course, we were successful because this is why we're here today. So Les has a long history of working in the region. He knows the region quite well now, and he's provided 6 years of technical support to the work that we do. So we're very, very happy to have him here today to share information with us about this IARC and IACR publication. I've asked him to give a presentation that's about 30 minutes long so that we have about 20 minutes after for what I hope to be a very active and productive question and discussion session. And I really do urge you to, if you have any questions, there's no bad question, there's no wrong question. We are here simply to learn about the process that you read. If it has not been addressed in the presentation, that you do take this time to ask Les. Okay, and then we'll have the closing and evaluation session. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to hand it over now, Les. I'm going to stop sharing so you can go ahead and share your screen. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and hello to everyone. I recognize many of the names, but of course, it'd be much better to be there in person. I'd really like to thank the Hub for the initiative and all the partners for the opportunity to discuss some of CI5, or Cancer Incidence in 5 Continents. So what I plan to do is very much in line with what Sarah had outlined. Let me try to share a screen. Okay, and I'll put it in presentation mode. Okay, can you see the full screen now? Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
It's coming out weird on my side, but I can manage. Okay,
oh, no.
So thank you again, Sarah, and everyone involved for the opportunity. What I'm going to try to do here just now is take you through a bit of introduction, starting with some rationale and history, mostly because I just want to transfer some of the importance behind the publication and the general concept and how it's been used. Then take you through a little bit of the timeline for the last publication and the rationale for that just being that we haven't as yet completely worked out the dates, and I'll come into that in a moment, but just to give you a flavor a little bit of how things run. Then I believe the part probably most people are interested in is the third, which is the editorial process. And as you'll see, it's not one that we script in stone, but I'll try to take you through the main components of that. And then finally, just to leave some comments with respect to looking beyond CI5 and some opportunities, and also some mechanisms for support. So to start, and some of you will recognize, particularly late Dr. John Young, but then also Kevin Ward, who played a big role in cancer registration worldwide. And just some comments with respect to cancer registries, and I think this will be well known to most people, but firstly, with respect to the level of development in terms of their nomenclature, standards, rules, etc. What this gives rise to, of course, is some opportunities by way of comparisons, and we benefit from that. but then also more recently, some opportunities with respect to highlighting their importance through some of the NCD goals, some higher level UN goals. Again, not to go into much detail here, I think it will be somewhat familiar to the audience, but I think you'll probably have heard by now with respect to Sustainable Development Goals, which NCDs are included, and particularly cancer, and I highlight just here on some of the slides. But related to that is also just the big picture, where the work we've been doing together with many partners really starts to put together the evidence around the burden of cancer worldwide, and in particular, some of the rising trends, and as depicted here, where cancer is soon to be a leading cause of premature death in many places of the world, and already is, those that you see in shades of blue, but then also in other countries where it's already within the top 5 causes of death, and then in some places where it's soon to be that as well. So just why are we concerned with cancer registries beyond just gathering the information? Of course, it's to do something with that, and namely, through population-based cancer registries, we really look towards informing cancer control programs and understanding the burden, how things are changing, how plans can be implemented, and more importantly, how they can be measured thereafter. And so there's 2 complementary mechanisms, of course, the mortality statistics gathered through vital registrars, but then also with respect to incidents coming from population-based cancer registries. And this slide just tries to capture some of the main uses and purposes of cancer registries. You see there, as mentioned already, about informing the burden, person, place, and time, descriptive statistics around that, and also, very importantly, acting as a basis for cancer control. You see some of the examples there. But then finally, and not only the area of interest of the agency at IARC, but certainly in other groups as well, and that's also looking towards supporting research. So what is the picture then? I just wanted to give you some context, and maybe this can better situate the importance of the publication. This is a map depicting some of the status of registration. It's roughly around the time of submission from the last volume of CI5, so dating back to 2018. The countries depicted in blue are those in which we have high quality population-based registries already in existence, these covering the entire country. And then others not necessarily the whole country, but at least one per country in those depicted in blue. And then degradation down to the level of no data, which you see in the darker shades. So as you can visualize from the map, and I'm sorry, the Caribbean region is quite small. That's not intentional. It's just to give the scope of the worldwide picture. But as you can see, there's still many parts of the world in which cancer registration data is lacking, at least high quality data, one that we can use with respect to informing cancer control. So part of our mission at the agency has always been, since its inception, to work to change that picture and to support cancer registration. And I thought I'd leave you with one very quick slide with respect to IARC, and namely to underscore its role as a specialized agency within the World Health Organization. So a little more about our section and where the publication comes from. We're part of, here at the agency, the section of cancer surveillance, or CSU. And really we have 3 main mandates. One is the registry support and collaboration, so assisting registries worldwide to improve the picture of data and local data and its use. The second is a mandate with respect to dissemination of global indicators. And that's where CI5, Cancer Incidence 5 Continents, fits in, and the extensions of some of the products, which I'll show later. And then finally, an active role with respect to descriptive epidemiologic research. So just what is the aim of CI5? It's really, in a simple way, is to put together a comparable set of data. And for that reason of comparability, it does pass through a review process. And I think I've always liked this slide, which is a depiction of Sir Richard Dahl, who was involved, along with others, in the first book, in fact, the concept for cancer in 5 continents. And really, as the quote describes, the importance of being able to compare comparable data and how that can give rise to hypotheses and really highlight some areas of activity and research and cancer control in the future. And that's how the book has continued to be used as we've gone through various iterations. So just to come to the second part then, in terms of what actually comes into the volume, and I'll take you through a little bit of the last work that we did. So this is looking backwards to the timeline. We began the work for the most recent printed edition, which is volume 11 of the series Cancer Incidence in 5 Continents. We began this work in June 2015. I take you through this with the idea that much of the next volume is intended to follow the same process at the moment. That at least is the planning. We formulated an internal group from staff and scientists here at the agency that constituted the editorial board, together with a representative from the International Association for Cancer Registries. We had issued a call for data, which I'll walk you through in a moment. This lays out the specifications and requirements from registries who wish to submit in June of that year, with an initial deadline in November that was subsequently extended a few times, just to allow for some registries to be able to meet the deadlines and also to handle some of the comments and review components that we had provided to them. In the end, 483 registries worldwide submitted the data for review. And this went through a series of meetings where we look at the data by region. I'll walk through some of those examples, and then to come forward with a decision. So that generally involves a review initially by 2 of the editorial board members and then presented to the entire board for decision, which then is followed by a letter to the registries outlining what the findings were, whether there's a need to clarify, resubmit data, or acceptance. So in terms of the next volume, perhaps this is the main slide for those that are mostly concerned with the submission. Where we stand today is that we're planning for a launch next month, hopefully. So this would be June 2021. I say hopefully only because there's been one major impediment apart from COVID, where we know that some registries have had difficulties in maintaining their case abstraction and data entry. But with respect to outside of COVID, I should say, we're also having to deal with a large change with respect to data privacy and confidentiality and the ability to share data sets, particularly within Europe. This is by way of GDPR. And so we've been working with the European network of cancer registries and other groups to resolve these issues so that there is a mechanism for everyone to continue to submit data. We also expect that in the call, we hope to include option for registries to submit to SERVCAN. For those who aren't familiar, the SERVCAN has been a long-running project within IARC where we periodically ask registries that are of high standing to be able to submit data on survival, which is also compiled in the same way that CI5 is for incidence, to look at comparability. The most recent version of SERVCAN was just published in the Lancet and a few other articles. The expected coverage, or not expected, the coverage for the next period will be for the incident years of 2013 to 2017. And as has been the case in all previous submissions, there's a requirement of at least 3-year minimum data submission in that time period. And it does, I did see the questions that were forwarded ahead of time, and it does need to come from a population-based cancer registry where there's a clearly defined catchment area and associated population that goes with that. We hope to launch the first editorial meeting, the formal one of the group, constitute the group and begin with some of the deliberations of what needs to be included, etc., in the call in June, July of this year, so next month. And then another point I should add is that we are looking for a mechanism by which registries, particularly again, those of high quality, would be able to, if they are willing and able, to submit annual data, just to allow for some updates and some refinements in the global can and national estimates for. But that too is still in discussion about the mechanism and way forward in which to do that. So we have not yet completed the call for data. What I can show you, however, and with the expectation that this will be largely similar, is walk you through what the call for data looked last time, which was the 11th edition. But as mentioned, for volume 12, we do anticipate it would be largely the same, with the exception of the SURFCAN data that I mentioned, which would be an additional option and would in fact not be part of the criteria for inclusion on CI5. It would be treated separately. So what begins is just a summary, and just to highlight for you that, as mentioned, there would be a target incidence period. So for this upcoming one is 2013 to 17, and that the requirement also includes 3 consecutive years of data within that period. Then what you see towards the bottom of the slide are the checklists of some of the important items. And so each of these data sets are part of the submission and constitute a full submission. So this includes the incidence file stemming from the registry, an associated population file, one that's from an official source of census data within the country, mortality data. This is not always the case and available, but as mentioned, they are preferably from official vital statistics offices, a file that depicts any special coding or codes that were used by the registry. And we also accompany this with a short questionnaire. This is basically to give us some background on the registry, noting any special changes, when it was launched, if there's a screening program, etc. And then finally, some introductory text, which we take from the online questionnaire. And then to also highlight for you just 2 other important areas that are part of the submission. One deals with data quality and coding. This is on the incidence file, and in particular, the IARC Cancer Registry tools, which for those who aren't familiar, these are a set of tools that you can use to come up with the same edits that are applied to the data once received. They look for compatibility between morphology, topography, age, etc. So we do encourage registries to run their data through the IARC check program first, but that can be done subsequently by us as well in liaison with the registry. In terms of how the submission works, we've set up a portal together with and all of this I should mention is a partnership with the International Association for Cancer Registries, the professional body that governs the practice of cancer registration worldwide. And so we've set up a portal. So registries that are already members would have a registry code and then therefore a password and login. For new registries, this would be set up by us simply by way of some emails and some dialogue. But essentially what this portal allows registries to do is safely transfer their data. So this has been screened by data security, privacy experts, and has been set up and used on all of our studies for the past several years. You can see here there's a selection of the different data sets that could be submitted. This again has not been updated for the current submission of CI5 Volume XII, but just what's depicted here are the various SURFCAN studies 2 and 3, and then also the last version of CI5. Where, as with many of these, you simply follow the screen instructions, but quite simple and easy to use. So just to highlight for you a little bit about contents, give you a sense of what's involved following submission. This is the last version, volume 11, that was published. We have put it online in October of 2017, I believe, or 18. And then more recently, the book was published as a hard copy and will be distributed to all the registries. We chose to do an abridged version compared to the Volume 10, simply because of the growing number of registries that have been involved. But we have tried to make all of the information available to those who wish in various forms, electronic and otherwise. They do include, as mentioned, the narratives on each registry. This is some background to orient a reader in terms of important details for the registry, but then also some of the summary tables, both cancer specific and then also population specific. And then finally, and very importantly, what we do subsequent the collection and review of data is to use the information to then formulate the contents of GCO, which is Global Cancer Observatory, or formerly GlobalCan for those who may be familiar. And this is really a series of steps aimed at estimating the global burden of cancer, including that at a national level. So this, again, is just a little bit of information for you, for those who may be interested, not to go through it in great detail, but this was the news launch item at the agency at the time in 2017 when it was released. And so as you see, we had 465 populations that actually submitted their data, and this arose from 343 cancer registries in 65 countries. So you may ask why the different number of populations versus registries. And that's simply because for a specific registry, they may also include a specific population, such as by ethnicity and otherwise. So these were the numbers that we saw in the last edition. This slide then depicts for you just some of the changes. As you can see, in 2017, we did experience some growth with respect to the registries and then also with respect to the number of populations from previous volumes. But the trend is in the right direction, which is a growing availability of good quality cancer registry data worldwide. Of course, the picture is not so uniform, and I just don't want to spend too much time here, but simply leave you with the point that we have much work to do with respect to some regions of the world where the coverage among those has stayed relatively flat. You see the grouping near the bottom, while in other parts of the world, namely North America and Oceania, we've seen almost complete coverage through the course of volumes of CI5. And this is just another depiction, not to go into all the details, but I can leave you with these slides afterwards for Sarah to distribute or others. But simply to say where we stand from the last volume was approximately 15%. And then in terms of the populations and registries, this is again a breakdown of what you can see with respect to the number of countries. And this is by submission, which is different from the final acceptance. There was a question with respect to new data sets, and do we consider those? We certainly do. One can appreciate how, for those working in the field, that it's difficult often to be able to assess new data sets as there is not a baseline, but simply to say there were many new data sets submitted and in fact accepted during the last volume. And in particular, just with respect, I want to highlight China, where there's been a great deal of activity, and then also in sub-Saharan Africa, where we've seen a growth in the number of new registries. So just some summary comments on the registration before moving to the editorial process. And that is, we have seen a big pickup with respect to new submissions, particularly in low middle income countries, expansion of registries as mentioned, and even a number of new registries accepted for the first time. Some of the challenges that were highlighted in the last publication include the increase in accepted data sets, but these mainly still stem from high-income countries. We did not receive submissions from some long-standing registries and contributors, and then also some registries that did submit, but unfortunately were not accepted in the most recent volume. So for those who might not be familiar and wish for more details, we do have a website, as referenced there in the bottom corner, that describes much of the process. There's the online version, in fact, that takes you through the classification coding, all the comparability that was used. It's outlined in great detail. And in some of the summary tables, and I should note that for those who are using CanReg, these are all available in CanReg. Essentially, they replicate the tables As you see here, this is an example stemming from the Philippines in the Manila Cancer Registry from the last publication. And then also one looking specifically at cancer of the esophagus, just to say that these are automated tables, but then one can also go through some ones that you can form on your own. So what then is the editorial process? And I'd like to do this just illustrating a little bit with latest volume. We go through three constructs, and those are the ones that all of you are probably familiar with on data quality, and that being comparability, completeness, and validity. What you see encoded in blue are the main areas in which we look at. And I say main because it's not a process that is fixed in the sense of any hard cutoffs, for example, hard endpoints of saying that the DCO, death certificate only, must be a certain percentage. We do all of these comparisons based on the evaluation with respect to the region overall and try to situate the registry within the region. Simply from the point of view that we're aware that within each region there are some global challenges or regional challenges, and we try to take that into account as best we can. So what do these look like in terms of completeness? In the two graphs you see, that on the left and that on the right, on the very bottom, just a depiction of the annual number of cases by registry. This is not the rate, but simply the number of new cases. As you can see on the left, it's slightly increasing, while on the right, it's more chaotic. So the right is obviously one where we'd be more concerned with just what would be happening. This doesn't necessarily mean a rejection, but it would simply mean a query to the registry, or at least a flag to explain partially why that may be the case. We also, of course, look at the age-specific incidence curves of cancers, noting the main ones. And often the concern here is just a drop-off, particularly in the later age groups, above 65 and 70 in some countries. And then we have a comparison chart, which is also available in CanReg. This is again based on registries in the region, where we look at observed versus expected number of cases stemming from these registries, and try to highlight for the editorial board some possible concerns and areas to query the registry. So these take through the number of cases, the age standardized rate, MV, which is microscopically verified proportion of cases. This varies, of course, by site and by region, and then DCO. So these are the main ones we look at. And then, of course, the denominator is also quite important. We try to compare the current estimates of the population by age and sex with that of the previous submission, in which case there is no previous submission. We try to look for comparable data. This slide is too small to visually see, but it takes you through some of that, and it is available in some of the publications. So just beyond CI5, how do we use some of the data, and why is it so important to submit, and why we would be encouraging each of the registries in the region as much as possible to consider submission? And largely it revolves around the question of being able to then situate and benchmark the data and also contribute towards global estimates of cancer. And I highlight for you some examples, in which here you see some cohort examples coming from Australia, but then also contributions to some of the literature. And these, I'm simply putting forward just a few of the examples, but in fact, there's been much that has been done with the data, all to examine just patterns in cancer and better understand the potential trends and hypothesize as to why that may be. So this was some of the latest publication around that using the CI5 data, and then also previously another look at some of the statistics. And then one reference here for those who may be interested, particularly it relates to CI5 data assessments, and that's some of the standards and sources that have been used. I mentioned that a lot of this then gets rolled into GCO, the Global Cancer Observatory, in particular Cancer Today, which tries to highlight some of the happenings. These are examples of population sheets, and I've taken here just the one from Barbados, where we have set fact sheets which take the data from from the region, using both that submitted and made available through other means to come up with national estimates, and then another example stemming from Indonesia. And then finally one from Africa, where you see depicted the registry profile page, and then some work they had done subsequently with the same data and with work from the regional hub to further look at the regional trends. And this took place in sub-Saharan Africa, where there was a regional publication. So finally, just to conclude, to bring this around in terms of beyond CI5, I depict here just some of the challenges, in particular our focus at the Agency on Low Middle Income Countries and the reasons for that, namely the expected burden in the future and some of their trends or some of the challenges that have been observed. For that reason and others, we've launched with a group of partners, which CARF and others on the call have been instrumental, a program called the Global Initiative for Cancer Registry Development. Dr. Glenys Sedell is depicted here, the former principal investigator, CARF, Sarah, and Nkosi and others in the hub who have been helping to support the region, including the submission here. We, together with GICR, this is a global capacity building program. One of the important instruments we've tried to implement is support by way of a growing number of regional trainers. Sarah has been part of that, and the others you see in the region, Jacqueline and others, that have been helping with these efforts to disseminate and support your work in cancer registration around the world. And it'd be important to mention also the partners that you see at the top of the slide. The hub has received a great deal of technical and direct support from NACER, the National Cancer Institute in the US, CARFA, of course, being the host, but then also PAHO and CDC, among other partners. We've put together the hub with regional trainers and then now have introduced, though in very early form, a collaborating center, which would be a mechanism to further disseminate some of the support and help groups as they go forward. And we've just are now underway with another GICR net, which is a network of regional trainer course, and one on childhood cancer. And you see on the right-hand side, the 3 participants from the region, Sarah, Daisy, and Corey. This is a depiction of some of the worldwide trainers and some of the support I hope you're aware of that has been made available, particularly technical support and our message around this in terms of always prioritizing high quality data for the country. Also some of the focus in terms of what should be included. This relates to CI5 as well, because the mandatory variables that you see depicted on the left-hand side of the slide all constitute part of the submission in some way, but we don't ask for anything beyond. In particular, oftentimes registries are looking to collect risk factor clinical data and other linkages with data sets, but that's not part of CI5, and it's in fact not part of the international standards for cancer registries. So I'll stop there, but leave you just with a moment to catch this slide. But it was a recent publication from the Lancet that I think really brings together quite nicely sort of the work and not to think of it as just CI5 as its own, but really how cancer registries contribute towards a better understanding of cancer control, helping to inform decisions and certainly track. And I think this quote here, as I've given you time to read, really says that. And rather than just investing, one needs to take time to understand the data and what is actually happening through better cancer registries. And that's the effort that's involved behind CI5 in a much larger way. So I'll stop there. Happy to take some questions, but do want to acknowledge all of our partners, particularly the regional hub in the Caribbean, US National Cancer Institute, CDC, NACER, but then those worldwide. And this is just, in fact, a small grouping. Okay. So happy to take questions or dialogue as you wish, but hopefully that's been able to leave you with a bit of understanding with respect to the process. So thank you. I'll stop there, Sarah, and turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Les, for that comprehensive overview. And just to mention, since you mentioned the partners, that we do have persons on from our regional partners, that being, sorry, and international partners, but being NASA and NCI are on as well. So if they would like to provide input or questions, they're more than welcome to as well. There was a question in the chat. I'm wondering if we want to start off with that. Shelley-Ann, do you want to go ahead? And please feel free, everyone, if you'd like to raise your hand using the Zoom reaction at the bottom of your screen, or go ahead and type your message in the chat. And Shelley-Ann, I don't know if you want to go ahead, or would you like to?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Good morning to everybody. My main question, well, two questions, but the first one is, you mentioned the term high quality in reference to choosing what registries can submit or reviewing the registries. And I wondered if there was a standard definition for what that means, so it can provide guidance to the registries as to if there's anything that we should be doing or we are missing the mark where that high quality definition is being referenced. And then my second question had to do with census. So if a country is not, census data is not up to date, instead of the census file, do we just provide the methodology that we use to create or for our population statistics? So for example, if we're using the UN WPP, do we just make that statement or show how we've come up with the information that we're using for the population? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley, for the two questions. I mean, with respect to the first on high quality, I used the definition in an arbitrary way somewhat. It's really taken to mean those registries that in the past were accepted into CI5. If we turn that around to ask how do you become accepted, it really is around some of the main parameters I tried to briefly outline around completeness, validity, and timeliness, etc. So what we do there is try to go through each of the pieces. So we look at the trends by year, simply from submitted by the registry. Then we also look at the stability of the 8 standardized rates, both with respect to the registry and the region as a whole. And then some of the common indicators around data quality, the microscopically verified that I tried to show on the one chart, DCO, even the mortality incidence ratio. In the age-specific curve. So all of that is used in totality. I wouldn't suggest that one, unless it's extreme, automatically excludes a registry. If we saw very high DCO or in fact very low DCO, one might be concerned, but we'd query the registry to understand the process and help to assure the editorial board that the processes are in fact consistent with population-based registries. So we try to look at things in a whole, but to go through each of the steps. What a registry can do ahead of time, if you will, I would suggest certainly running the data through the IARC checks program to flag some of the multiple primaries and different compatibility issues that we would also go through here at the agency. Then to replicate some of the same data quality tables that are used by the board. I think this is a good process in general for registries to do annually or biannually, just to look at trends in their own data. And these can all be reproduced via CanReg, but I can certainly copy or send out those tables as well to Sarah for distribution. But they're the ones I tried to highlight in the presentation, namely. And then in terms of the census, we do accept registries that, and we're aware of that some registries would not have access to mortality data. So that certainly is accepted. We try to flag those registries if they are pass in terms of the incidence file. the population, we can work with you on that. We are aware that some countries may have varying time periods for their census and having to use intercensal estimates, but that's one that we can simply work with you on that. So if you do end up submitting data, you could simply flag that, and we could come back to you and try to identify the best source for that.
Thanks, Les.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. And just to confirm, Les, Gonzalo, I see your hand, but just to confirm, the years that are being submitted for CI5 Volume 12 is 2013 to 2017, 5 years of data.
That's correct. Yes, yeah. With the stipulation that there must be a minimum 3-year consecutive period within the 5 years.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead, Gonzalo.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Les. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I have 2 questions. So the first is regarding the editorial board. In the past, in volume 9 and 10, you included people outside of IARC in the editorial board. That I see Brenda Edwards and Betsy Kohler here. And I wonder if, since this is a peer review publication, I wonder if why you moved just to people within IARC. I don't know if it's the same decision for this next volume. That's my first question. So the second question is regarding the ICDO updates, and if you right now use the IARC software to run those checks, it wasn't updated yet with the new ICDO codes from the first revision and from the second revision right now. And I was wondering if Jack Fairley has any update on that, if he plans to update the software to include those new codes, because if you run it right now, and since registries have been using these new codes for a while, you will end up with an invalid code from the software because it doesn't recognize that code. So
thank you, Gonzalo. I mean, I think you raised a good point on the ICDO. Jacques and others have been working with WHO just to get the required approvals and then also free up their time. But as of now, I don't believe that the program has been updated, but I believe it is a plan to try to do that in time for CI5. But I can check and confirm. We will make some notice, whether it's on the ICR website or in the call for submission with respect to this. But it certainly is a valid point that we take. I think it just comes down to staff time and capacity to do that. Then with respect to the editorial board, I think it is true that we would benefit obviously from a wider participation. Unfortunately, just with the number of submissions we're seeing now, as that's been growing, we have to have more and more editorial board meetings. And then also in conjunction with that, we have changed the makeup of the section, particularly around GICR, where we have 3 scientists, myself, 2 others, who are tasked with various regions of the world and working with the registries. That brings a little more local knowledge, if you will, regional knowledge to the review process. So for that reason, we've elected to continue with the last makeup for the board. But I think that for the moment, anyways, it's really a function of just practicality and then also change of staff makeup with the launch of the GICR.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Gonzalo. Is there anybody else with a question? While
I had a question. Sorry, Sarah. I think it's mainly for CARFA. Thanks for the presentation, Les. This is Katura from Bermuda. Yes. I just wanted to know if the hub would be providing the IARC check sort of support to us and things like that, and sort of technical support all around. I think we tried to submit data for the last edition of this, and we did not get accepted. So if there was a mechanism for us to run some of our stuff through CARFA, or to have CARFA give us some feedback before we go to IARC, that would be really great. Thanks.
Hi, Katura. Thanks for your question. I should have really said that at the beginning, but this is the first step in a process, and the hub is here to support our Caribbean cancer registries in this process. So we recognize that in our region, there's not a lot of data available. So from our region, there were 3 registries that were accepted in the last CI5 publication. And that's not a lot. And a lot of this data is used to estimate cancer burden in other countries. And it's not necessarily, the estimates are very good, but it's not necessarily a true reflection of burden. And we understand that. So our purpose, what we're aiming for is to improve the availability of high quality data for the region. So this is just the first step in that process, was really just to share information and have Les here share information about the process. And then we plan to support you along the way. So registries that are interested, that have the data, that are interested in submitting, we plan to support you through the process. So yes, Katura, any help you need with the IARC check programs, we're very happy to do that. In terms of reviewing data quality before submission, we're very happy to do that. So, and helping you with the process and helping with the liaison process between IARC and registries. That's our goal for the next year, I guess, as long as the submission process takes. But we are here to provide that support.
Thank you.
Gonzalo, do you have another question, or is your hand just up from the last time?
No, that's I still have my hand there, but I have no further questions.
Okay, okay, great. I had a question. In terms of, and this is for Les, what would be the most important areas that registries can work on to improve data for CI5 submission?
Well, I mean, I think one of the areas that we see often is with respect to completeness. It does become more difficult assessing that when you have small populations, as is the case in the region, where you can get some fluctuations, as you know. But completeness certainly is one of the clear indicators that we've had to look at registries for in terms of rejection. So this would be really wild jumps in the rates or case ascertainment per year, number of cases by year, particularly with respect to if there's been a legacy where we can look back on the registry and assess some of that. Of course, looking at rates, one always does need to consider population as well. We had a few examples in the last submission where the rates fluctuated within a certain year or a certain group of years, and it was determined, in fact, the problem was with respect to the population rather than the registry. So I think the completeness is one. Obviously, the microscopically verified is another key indicator, although as I tried to communicate, it's not looked at on its whole in terms of a set cutoff. But we've had examples where in the past registries submitted and they were disappointed to learn that they were rejected, or at least a flag was raised because the MV percent was near 100. And the reasoning for that, or the explanation, is that when it's near 100, it gives some concern to us that it may in fact be a hospital-based registry exclusively rather than a population-based registry. So again, the registries provided the opportunity to comment on an initial review. We try as much as possible to highlight the main concerns around that. Another common area is with respect to just the age-specific curves, and some drop-off in reporting for the later age groups, also perhaps even in the childhood cancer age group, so the 0 to 15. We know that the practice in some registries may be to, in fact, have some of the children may go to seek treatment elsewhere, and it results in the registry not being able to track those patients where there's generally a small numbers anyway. So if you end up missing a significant portion, it really can show with respect to regional comparisons. And similarly for some of the lymphatic types of tumors where we have seen trends at times when we look by cancer site, you can really see a drop off. And similarly with metastatic sites, where some registries, often owing to a lack of specificity in the diagnosis, whether it's a high proportion that are clinically diagnosed only, you see then some cancer sites over-reported, namely those that are typically metastatic, such as lung and liver and brain, etc. So I think it's a general review, but there are some good examples in the literature, ways in which registries can review their data, implement some data quality checks annually, and have those practiced. So I would strongly advise that this be done not only for the purpose of CI5, but just generally adapted towards the practice of registries. And maybe it could be a topic that we can look at further down the road in terms of setting up a special webinar or a series of short webinars. I think, Sarah, you've already been involved in some of this, Gonzalo and others in the hub. So depending on people's needs and interests, we can maybe adapt or look to doing that in the future.
Yes, that sounds great. Brenda, you have a question? Brenda is joining us from NCI.
Yes, hi, Les.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi, let me just say I think Roberto Zanetti was on the editorial board for the last volume, and I think it's because he was president of IARC. Anyway, so you did have someone, but the question is, are you planning on perhaps asking the president of IARC to be on it? That's minor. My big question is, do you have any plans for trying to, if you will, utilize the hubs or experts that are out sort of globally, and also try to put more tools in place that would help facilitate the checking and the pre-processing of the data for what you would be doing for the submission? And an example would be, I mean, we've heard the good point from the CHECK program in terms of the new codes. I mean, I really do think one has to kind of move in that direction to get those tools. But the other is a thought that, could you have a system where you download, if you will, sort of ways to check it beyond iCheck, the CHECK program? You have examples of the kind of output that you have distributed back to the registries, or you look at the registries. I mean, so can you sort of put together some systems that would actually help facilitate the work that you're doing at IARC, looking at these data sets, because you're building capacity with these hubs, and there are a lot more people that I think can help other colleagues. And so, but I guess you need a more distributed way to do that, as opposed to using the process of submitting through your system. Can you have the, if you will, the output that comes from what you do to look at the data more available, and so that we could use more of those tools? I think that's kind of a process and sort of approach that you'll be taking.
Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. I mean, those are good points, and certainly ones we would share. I guess the question comes around how best to do that, particularly with the integration of other groups. And as one can appreciate it, while we want regional input, it also still is a global initiative with respect to the publication, Cancer Incidence in 5 continents. So there is a necessity of a core editorial board that does look at all the regions and tries as best as possible to account for some of those differences. But certainly the hub is part of that vision going forward. And so we'll have to have some discussion and take ideas on how best to do that. There is the encouragement, I went through it really quickly, but there was, from the last CI5, one regional report that was produced. This was in sub-Saharan Africa with Max Parkin at Oxford and others. We are hoping that there could be more of these in the future. So what this report did is included all registries, not only those in CI5, so those as well that were rejected, if you will, and tried to look at the data. And I think this could be a good mechanism to consider perhaps as we go forward. Not only does it then get into the practice of submitting data and analyzing it, but hopefully it could create some discussion among many registries with respect to the interpretation, and then perhaps even identifying data quality training needs going forward in the next period. On the pre-processing, you're right. I think there could be more tools put in place, and we're certainly not against it. It again largely comes down to staff capacity. But what we have taken that people should be aware of is there's been a lot of work in CanReg to integrate all of the data quality tables that we use as part of CI5, including the regional comparisons. Those are now built into CanReg. So any registry can, in fact, replicate each of the tables that would be used in the CI5 process. They can look at the data. They can also look at the IARC edit check program and the outputs from that. And those are the two main pieces that we use. And so they are available to registries. I know that some registries, of course, aren't using CanReg, and we're working towards setting up sort of a CanReg Lite, which would basically be just a tool that lets registries import their data, not necessarily use it for data entry and management, but purely on the analytics side that would then give them access to the tools. For those registries that are adverse to CanReg or wish to carry on, there's also the coding behind CanReg. So Nikosi and others have been working with CanReg and supporting it, but there's also the R codes. So these are the programming language behind CanReg that could also, for those users familiar with R, an analyst could look at that and then also replicate all of the CI5 tables based on that coding. So these are available. Yeah, sorry, Sarah. And Sarah, you've been trained on this, and as have others. So those tools are freely available for everyone to use.
Great, thanks very much, Les. I just wanted to comment on two things. You mentioned the having standards that our registries can compare their data to. And I know this is something we mentioned in the data quality masterclass, where there's a regional standard. So what should the DCO percentage look like? What should the MV percentage look like? And that's something that the hub is working on. So I'm going to contact you about that soon. Okay. But developing what those regional standards are so that we have that standard table that registries can compare to know what their data looks like, whether it's where it should be or what work needs to be done. So that's one thing. And you mentioned the Caribbean publication. And just to mention to everybody, that's also something that we're exploring and that we would like to work on, that not necessarily the data may not be at that top quality standard that's required for CI5, but still having the availability of, because we have a lot of data in our region and long-standing data, and that's not always necessarily published because of various reasons. And yes, the data will have to meet a standard, but that we can still produce a report for the region and have data available for use. So that's something else that we're also working on as well.
Yeah, very good. I gave the example from Sub-Saharan Africa, yes. So it could be one. Of course, it doesn't mean as the only way, but just one at least you could, or the group could look at to consider and maybe make modifications. But exactly. Certainly the idea was to have registries contribute their data and then use that data in the best way possible, making note of potential differences in quality when comparisons. It's hard to do because even when we stratify by high quality registries, we know there's some degradation often that can come in, whether it's regional or by year. It's a challenge, as I think anyone's been involved in that process would understand.
Absolutely. Okay, just being cognizant of the time. If there are any more questions, please feel free to contact me by email and I can send these on to Les and have a response. I can compile responses and share them with the group.
Sure.
And I can definitely respond to individual. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.
Everybody.
I hope it was useful, and we will have another webinar coming up soon that I will share information about.
Okay. Thanks
again, Les.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.